in my response. I would be remiss in my responsibilities if I didn't note that the importance of Sat Tila Ekadasi is connected with the Tila, sesame seeds. So the Sat Tila, 6 ways that sesame seeds are utilized on this Ekadasi. One has the option to bathe in sesame seeds, take water that has sesame seeds sprinkled in it and bathe in that. One has the option to spread sesame paste upon the body. It's very purifying and cleansing. One can offer sesame seeds into the Jugna fire. Of course, one can eat sesame seeds. This is a very nice way to do it, either mixed into a vegetable preparation or made into a wonderful sweet. One can give sesame seeds in charity, and one can accept sesame seeds in charity. So these are the 6 Sat ways that the sesame Tila, Sat Tila Ekadasi is observed. I've had a very nice exchange with my dear friend Sesha Prabhu and his wife Madhumati for, oh boy, going back some 20 years now, where every Sat Tila Ekadasi we exchange sesame seeds in some form or another. So this is just one of those things that help us to appreciate what are the reasons behind the different functions that we do in Krishna consciousness. You know, if we just blindly and uninformedly execute these things, we certainly get benefit. But if we do it with full knowledge, that benefit is even greater. So thank you all for this wonderful opportunity to engage in hearing and chanting on this Sat Tila Ekadasi. I'll let the two of you direct me. I don't know what your format particularly is, how you want to go about this.
Well, we're very honored to have you. And I thought just briefly, you could just introduce how you got into Krishna consciousness, and the main topic would be, as we've already announced, pitfalls to avoid, but how did you become a devotee or get attracted yourself?
Mm-hmm. You want the Cliff Notes version or the encyclopedia version?
Well, whatever.
How about in the middle there somewhere? I'll go.
Yeah, I'm sure it's hard to. I'm sure it's interesting. So it would be fascinating to hear.
Well, you know, I actually started down somewhat of a spiritual direction my last year of high school. I'm almost 70 now, so a few years ago. And at that time, I had become a vegetarian and I was starting to do some yoga. And, you know, of course, I had a, how shall we politely in mixed company say, a variety of sundari other activities in high school that may or may not actually been spiritually beneficial, although I was convinced they were at that time, at any rate. So, but, you know, like that. And then when I graduated from high school, I moved into a commune. And this commune ran a health food store and had a couple of acres of land at which we grew things on. And there were 11 members in that commune. 9 of those members all became devotees. Of those 9, 7 still are devotees. And of those 7, 5 are connected here with the Alachua community. So kind of an interesting direction that that commune had for us. We had a Panchatattva picture there and a Tulsi plant. And one by one, the different members of that commune read Prabhupada's books, became completely convinced, and went down and moved into the temple, and we never saw them again.
So where was that commune at?
That was in St. Louis County. I grew up in St. Louis, and it was in North County there.
Mm.
And so I came to an epiphany, which is a whole nother longer story that involves a different direction. But I came to an epiphany and realized that, you know, my spiritual life was here. And I was planning on going to India to find a guru, and I didn't really need to do any of that. I could just take up Krishna consciousness here. So I went down and knocked on the front door of the temple, Gaur Purnima of 1973. And they opened the door and I said, "Hi, I'm from the common room. I'm here to join." He said, "Sure, come on in." You know, things were a little different back then. Somebody knocked on the front door, you brought them right in, shaved them up, put them in a toady. We're a little bit more reserved about that these days. But the interesting thing was that all of the previous members, I was the third from the last of those 9. All the previous members had been quite scholarly, quite well read in Prabhupada's books and quite knowledgeable. I had actually never read any of Prabhupada's books. I'd seen the Devotees once or twice, and I think we visited the temple once or twice, but I just knew this was what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so they assumed I was another one of these scholars and brought me right in. And I remember the temple president told me about 6 months later, he said, "If I'd have realized that you knew as little about Krishna consciousness as you did, I probably wouldn't have let you move in." So I realized that somehow or another, Krishna gave me that opportunity at that time, which was extremely eventful for me to take up this path of devotional service. And like everyone else in that time, we did whatever service was given to us, whatever was needed. We had a temple of 26 devotees, 3 of which were initiated, 4 of which were initiated, and the rest of us were all bhaktas and bhaktins. And we had an amazing program. We'd get up for the morning, of course, Mangal Arti, Japa, Guru Puja. Then we would have Srimad Bhagavatam class. After Bhagavatam class, we would have our morning breakfast. At that time, breakfast was as much sweet rice and halva as any one person could eat. You know, we were all 20 years old. You could get away with that. And then after that, we did 2 hours of cleaning service. And our temple was famous for just being spotlessly clean. And then after the cleaning service, we would have a morning class in Nectar Devotion. And then after the Nectar Devotion class, we have a class on Sri Upanishad. After the Sri Upanishad class, we would go to the noon arti. We all knew Bhaja Bhakatavat, Bashalashi Godo Hari. We could sing the whole song. And then we would go out on street kirtan, our book distribution, all afternoon. Then we would come back, shower, go to the Gora Arti, then have a Bhagavad Gita class. And then after the Gita class, we'd all have hot milk and read Krishna book. So we had 6 classes a day. And we were really, really knowledgeable by dint of this example of our temple president of what the details of Krishna consciousness were. You know, this was before the Bhakti Shastri classes and, you know, all of these things. This was just the temple president we had just understood this was a very important asset and factor of being a devotee. And we were all trained like that. So, you know, repeatedly over the years, I've looked back very grateful and thankful to that temple president. His name was Makanlal Das, who later became Bhakti Madhurya Bhava, and he's passed away now. But just an amazing devotee, really gave us that training. So that was the foundation on which my Krishna consciousness grew. And, you know, I was fortunate to be a part of many different major functions in Krishna consciousness, the Radha Damodar party at some point, the installation of Prabhupada's Murti at the Samadhi, the installation of the gopis in Sridham Mayapur. You know, I was very fortunate to be able to be a part of all 3 New York temples, the 55th Street Temple, the 7th Avenue Temple, and the Skirmerhorn Temple in Brooklyn. And as was noted in the beginning, I've been very happy to be trained in different pujas and jagas and get this opportunity to travel with Indradyumna Swami and Bada Hari Prabhu and take Krishna consciousness wherever we go and spread it enthusiastically. That, of course, has not happened for the last 2 years. All of us here have had the same experience where, we haven't done much of any kind of traveling, but we found that it was actually a boon to the Krishna consciousness, because these type of Zoom conferences, they were not very common. They weren't done very much and nobody really participated in them. But with the onset of the restrictions from the pandemic life of the last 2 years, these types of conferences have become the way we associate. And it's expanded our ability of association tremendously. People from all over the world. I have one class that I give once a week, and there's people from Jordan, people from Israel, people from Oman, devotees from New York, from London. We're able to have these international arrangements that somehow or another had passed us by. We just didn't think of that previously. So although a lot of us have been restricted in our movements, we can be very grateful, very thankful about the fact that we've got this opportunity for Sangha in such a way. And so I take the dust of the feet of all of you Vaishnavas on my head and simply pray that this type of association will benefit all of us and purify us in a most wonderful way. So thank you very much. That was the Cliff Note version. All right. So I've been asked tonight to speak about pitfalls in devotional service. And of course, I'm quite familiar with pitfalls in devotional service, having made my fair share of them over the years. This is the nature of our maturing and growing in devotional service. Excuse me. We've all come to the process of devotional service with so many anarthas, so many unwanted desires and habits and backgrounds. And so it's quite understandable that we'll make mistakes. It's expected. There's that wonderful story of Shyamasundar Prabhu, who was engaged by Srila Prabhupada in carving the first Jagannath deities for ISKCON. And as he was carving them, he would take his cigarette break. And when Prabhupada came to visit one time to see the progress, sitting on top of one of the unfinished carved deities was a pack of his cigarettes. Prabhupada didn't make a big deal about it. Oh, how can you do this? This is so horrible. You're committing such an offense. You're all going to... That wasn't Prabhupada's mood. He simply looked at it, touched it with his cane, and turned to Shyamasundar and said, "Don't let such a small thing come between you and Krishna." And that was it. Shyamasundar understood what was meant, and he understood the compassionate love that Prabhupada had by that simple statement, and he was able to give that up. So yes, we do have so many different shortcomings, but this is one of the important things that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. I often say that Krishna consciousness can always be traced back to the ABCs, to the Bhagavad Gita. We now have access to so many books. When I joined Krishna consciousness, we only had 4 or 5 books. Srimad Bhagavatam was nowhere near finished. I think we were just into the 4th canto. Chaitanya Charitamrita was the first 1 or 2 books. Now we have practically every Vaishnava literature that's ever been written available to us. But nonetheless, our philosophy always brings us back to the ABCs, and that's Bhagavad Gita. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna encourages us that whatever you do, whatever you eat, that should be an offering unto me. And he encourages us how to do it. Yo me bhakta prayachati. That whatever you offer me, just do it with love and devotion. We may not be the most expert mantra chanters. We may not be the most concise when it comes to performing deity seva. We may not be the most expert of debaters. We may not be the greatest Vedantist and knowers of all the philosophy. But whatever we do, if we steep that effort with devotion for Krishna, if we bring it with an effort to serve Krishna, then by that effort, we please him and he's happy to accept it. It's interesting because if we read the Nectar of Devotion, Krishna accepts devotional service in so many different ways. There's ghastliness is one of the rasas, and the whole list is there. But one of them that is not there is arrogance. Krishna does not accept our service in arrogance. Sometimes you see it, I'm the best mridanga player, I'm the best kartal player, oh, nobody gives a better class than me. Did you see how I did that puja? I tell you, nobody is, on and on and on and on and on. That class I gave, oh, what a class that was. That type of mood, Krishna doesn't accept that service. Krishna accepts that service. It has humility. If one renders some service with a mood of humility, Krishna is very happy to accept that. And that service can be of many different varieties. I mean, we have that wonderful story of Krishna coming to visit Vidura in his home. And Vidura is Krishna's dearmost devotee, born from the very father of Vyasadeva. Such a amazing, incredible personality. And we see that he had such devotion for Krishna that when Krishna came to his home, he was preparing a fruit dish and took the bananas, the fruit of the banana, and threw it away and offered the banana peels to Krishna. Krishna accepted that. Krishna took that and accepted it because Vidura had so much love. What is that song? I see a Prema Pujari. That Pujari who has the love for Krishna. So he had such love like that. Therefore, that's the type of mood we have to try and imbibe in our devotional service. Mistakes we'll make, but if we offer our service with a mood of love and devotion, with sincerity, then Krishna will overlook those mistakes. So what might those mistakes be? Well, we see here in the Nectar of Instruction, there's verse number 2. Atyahara prayayascha prajalpo niyamagraha jana sangas chalomyam cha shadbir bhakti vinasyati. The word for word on this, Prabhupada, is very detailed in how he explains it, but we'll just go straight to the translation here. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities: eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. Number 2, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. Number 3, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Number 4, practicing the rules and scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of spiritual advancement, and rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. That's an interesting one, which we'll go back to. Number 5, associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And finally, number 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. Now, that very first sentence in this translation of Prabhupada's is very, very interesting to examine. One's devotional service is spoiled. And we've all had the experience with something being left out of the refrigerator for too long that should have been kept in. Say, for instance, milk. If you leave milk sit on the counter for some period of time, it actually goes bad. It becomes sour. It's not at all palatable. It has a very, very unpleasant taste, and long enough, and it can actually make you ill. even something that's kept in the refrigerator for too long. And my wife has this experiment. She bought some bread someplace. It was a regular store-bought kind of bread, not any of the natural things that we would usually eat, and has kept those two pieces of bread in the refrigerator for, I think it's coming up on a year or more, and they haven't molded yet. This means that they've got a lot of chemicals in them, and this is what people are eating, you know? But generally speaking, if something is kept in the refrigerator too long, you know, there's that famous example of you open the vegetable drawer, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this? How long has this been in here? And this molded thing with fuzz and slime growing on it is pulled out, and then you have to clean the whole drawer out. So it's spoiled. That's what it is. So we have to be very careful on our devotional service that it doesn't become similarly spoiled. Now, one naturally wants to have a very fresh, vibrant, tasty devotional service to offer to Krishna. So how to do that? This is the beauty of Prabhupada's instructions to us through Rupa Goswami here, who's written this. He delineates what are the 6 things that will cause our devotional service to become spoiled. So he goes through them one by one. And the first one, he combines 2 things together in the first point: eating more than necessary and collecting more funds than necessary. I heard Prabhupada say on a lecture just the other morning, he was speaking about the need for his ISKCON society. And he was speaking about how much is spent each day on this and that, and how much is necessary. He said, therefore, we are collecting like anything. But we are not collecting any more than we need. Anything that is extra, immediately for printing books or for giving prasadam. He was very much to the point that one should not collect more than is necessary to carry out the service. Now, that may change. When our ISKCON society was, you know, just 26 Second Avenue, the amount of money that would be collected to go out on Harinam, I'm sure you've all read the books, and hold the conch shell out there and get some coins put in it, and that was quite satisfying. Now, of course, we're building the temple of the Vedic planetarium. This takes tens of millions of dollars. So the amount may differ, but the mentality of what is being used for and how it's being collected is there. And then the other half of that first one, eating more than necessary. This also has a time and place. I remember when I was a young brahmachari, and I actually was a young brahmachari once, it was not uncommon to sit down at a feast and have one entire plate of halava, one entire plate of sabji, one entire plate of rice, a whole pile of sweets, one person, all at one time, and then go and have crazy, wild kirtan. You could do it. The energy was there. The ability to digest was there. The output of that energy that it gave was there, all for Krishna. There was a time that I used to be able to drink 12 cups of sweet rice at a Sunday feast. 12 cups. Wouldn't even think about it. Just polish them off one after the next. Now, it's a much different standard. I get a cup of sweet rice and I'm like, okay, that was good. Thank you very much. An entire plate of halava? I couldn't even begin to think of such a thing. So the body changes, the functionality of the body changes, therefore what one can do with it changes as well. So what could be eaten when I was 20 years old is not what can be eaten when I'm 70 years old. And this is the natural course of things. So we have to see it in that way, and therefore not eating more than required. Even back then in the early days, Prabhupada was quite strict. You know, it wasn't that the Sunday feast type of eating was done every single day. Regularly, it was simple, basic prasadam. And then on the Sunday feast, fancy and elaborate preparations were made. So these types of things, we have to look at that. We have to see, how am I engaging myself? How am I engaging the funds? How am I engaging my tongue in eating? So the second thing we see here, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. When the devotees back in, I believe it was 1976, made an effort, my dear friend Balavanta and others made an effort to run for different political offices. Mayor of Atlanta, even some planned to run for president of the United States. Prabhupada encouraged that it could be done, but then it became very clear very quickly that it meant certain types of influences and certain activities that would be difficult in one's devotional life. Therefore, Prabhupada felt that this was too much of an unnecessary effort. We sometimes see that devotees get a grandiose idea, something a huge, big thing they want to do, and, you know, over endeavor, you know, to try and accomplish that. We have to be very practical in how we execute devotional service. True, Prabhupada was bold. Prabhupada was fearless. At my age, Prabhupada got on a boat and began to go and establish Krishna consciousness on the other side of the planet. And this was not in a time when it was as simple as what we're doing right here. None of the technologies or the comforts that we're experiencing now were available at that time to Prabhupada's efforts. I mean, we hop on a plane or get in a very, so many different types of traveling, and Prabhupada had to take a boat. So Prabhupada was bold, but at the same time, he did what was practical. Therefore, if something has a mundane reference, a mundane connection, and can be vinasyati, destructive to our devotional service, we have to be very cautious about that. We have to be very cautious about taking those types of risks. Number 4, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. Now, one can easily look at this and say, well, what's the problem? I should practice my different sadhana. I should practice the guidelines of devotional life. This nectar of instruction that we're looking at today, this is filled with so many wonderful instructions. So why wouldn't I do these simply for the sake of following them? Then it can be said, yes, he follows everything very nicely. But if one becomes caught up only in doing it for the sake of executing that, but not for the genuine purpose of advancing in devotional service, that's when it becomes an obstacle. Advancing in devotional service is something we have to desire. It's something we have to hanker for. And it's something we can analyze ourselves. Prabhupada said it's very clear. Again, on a class I was listening to, Prabhupada noted that it's very easy to see if we're Krishna conscious. Am I becoming more attached to Krishna and less attached to mundane activities? And it's important that we're a bit self-analytical in this regard. It's important that we look at ourselves, look at our devotional life, and give a little bit of analysis. Where am I? How am I advancing? I've been executing devotional service now for 1 year, for 10 years, for 50 years. Have I made any advancement? Am I still holding on to the same shortcomings and same attachments, or have I actually become detached from these things that attract me? So we have to analyze. And such analysis is best executed in the association of good friends. Those that we trust and those that will be honest with us. This is the nature of friendships in Krishna consciousness. If we don't have those types of friendships, we can fool ourselves. That's the nature of our mind. You know, the mind is always trying to convince us of something that may not actually be reality. I had one brahmachari friend, he's since passed away. He was a blissful devotee, but every once in a while, you could see by looking at his face that he'd gone down the rabbit hole, so to speak, that he was just really out there in Maya. And we'd say to him, Prabhu, what's going on? And he'd say, oh, you know, it's that old rascal mind. And that was his explanation, that old rascal mind. You know, like some old wise person that had been living on the front porch for years, observing the world, and someone walked by and asked, what have you learned? And he'd go, oh, it's that old rascal mind. You know, and that's exactly what happens. So having good association of dear friends that will speak frankly to us and in a caring, loving way can be very beneficial in the process of analyzing our level of advancement or lack thereof. Now, the second half of this part is or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. Today's a perfect example. Ekadasi. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the foremost example of our activities in Krishna consciousness. After all, this is one of the reasons Krishna appeared as Mahaprabhu, to show how does a devotee behave. There are many esoteric higher reasons, but we're talking on this level for today. One of the things he requested, the only thing he requested of his mother, please follow Ekadasi. Of course, he didn't himself always follow Ekadasi. There's that amazing story when he was a young boy, and next door to him lived one Jagadish Pandit. Now, Jagadish Pandit was the same age as his father, Jagannath Mishra. And Jagannath Pandit had moved specifically because he and Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Mata and Jagadish Pandit's wife were all very, very close friends. So they moved to Navadvip practically as next door neighbors to be with them and to assist in the raising of little Nimai. One day, little Nimai was a young boy, you know, maybe younger than 10. The age is not very clear. But he began crying. Hare Krishna, and then he would stop crying. This was his trick to get them to chant. So they tried chanting, nothing stopped. So his father said to him, what is it? What can we do for you? He said, well, next door, Jagadish Pandit is offering very nice rice to his deity, and I want some of that Mahaprasad. Jagannath Mishra was quite perplexed. A, it's Ekadasi. How can I feed him grains? B, how does he know what's going on over there at Jagannath Mishra's house? I mean, Jagadish Pandit's house. So Nimai convinced his father. Jagannath Mishra went to Jagadish Pandit's house, knocked on the door. My dear friend, I understand you've made a nice offering to your lords. Yes, we've offered nice rice. My son would like some of that. Yes, certainly. Jagadish Pandit was such a devotee of Mahaprabhu, immediately give. That's what he wants to give to him, no problem. So, in those circumstances, he was not following it. But as he grew older, as he took up the renounced order, very strictly following. So if, for instance, one decides, a little bit of a difficulty to follow Ekadasi, I don't really want to do it today. I'm not a big fan of Ekadasi. There, I've said it. But it's something that is required. Therefore, we do it. It's an austerity. So we don't eat certain things that we would regularly eat for breakfast. We give up certain types of activity, not activities, but foods that we would want to eat, and we refrain from that. This is the instruction of Mahaprabhu. This is the instruction of Srila Prabhupada. This is the instruction of the scriptures. So we do like that. And as a result of that, we make some advancement. But if we reject that, and as it says here, act whimsically, I don't feel like following Ekadasi, maybe I'll follow it next time, then this is actually a stumbling block and will spoil our devotional service. It's an interesting thing, as I have had the opportunity to travel around, I notice more and more the function of total fasting on certain days like Janmashtami or on Gaur Purnima. Many places devotees don't necessarily do that, especially you'll see many different temples have big prasadam tents because so many guests come and they're not following. And so, all right, whatever, we're not judging here, but we see that that is one of the standards, is to fast on these different days. This is the instruction given to us by Srila Prabhupada. So these different types of things, Prabhupada was very, very focused on regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. This is that famous verse in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that one should daily, nitya, eternally study Srimad Bhagavatam. So if one decides, anyway, it's not so important for me to read the books, I'll check out the morning newspaper and, maybe tomorrow I'll read a book or whatever. This is also a stumbling block on the path of devotional life. Nitya Bhagavata Sevaya, to regularly study the Srimad Bhagavatam. So here, this item number 4, to strictly follow something for the wrong purpose or to whimsically reject following the rules and regulations. This can all be very detrimental to us. Number 5 given here, to associate with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. Now, I'm assuming that many of the members of this forum here today work, have some kind of job. That means mixing with worldly minded people who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. Myself, for instance, I work at Lowe's. You're all in America, so you know what Lowe's is. And, let's just say politely, there's no devotees there. The part of the world that I live in, the part of the country I live in, the big activity is hunting. Hunting deer, hunting wild boar, and bringing the results of that hunting and sharing it with everyone in the lunchroom. So these are not the activities of even lofty-minded persons, what to speak of Vaishnavas. So how to associate with such people? I mean, you can't just be, uninvolved. I've worked at this place, for instance, for 13 years. So how do you work at a place for 13 years and yet not associate with worldly minded persons? Well, Prabhupada gave a very nice example of this. He said there's a difference in taking association and giving association. This is the understanding. Even it may not be that one goes to one's place of work in a dhoti with tilak and, hey, it's time to chant Hare Krishna, everybody get your beads out, or did you get a book today? Here, take this Bhagavad Gita. That may not be it, But by one's own example, others will come to know that there's something special about you. There's something different about you. Of course, in my circumstance, everyone I work with knows I'm a Hare Krishna. And because the store I work at is just minutes from the temple, all day long, devotees are coming in. And so, you know, at the beginning of the store's history, I was the go-to guy. Hey, how come they've all got their hands in that bag? What's in the bag, you know? What's the paint on their forehead all about? Why do they wear those robes, you know? They all live together in a commune and nobody has any money. And, you know, so I became the go-to Hare Krishna guy, which was good for me because it became an incentive that I had to also be conscious of my behavior. When you associate with worldly minded people, there's a tendency to take up their habits. Sometimes one's conversation or words that one uses become influenced by such association. I'm a huge fan of donuts. I can eat donuts every day of the week. I see a few reactions out there that there's some others in the same camp. It's a common thing at work. Once a week, couple of times a week, somebody will bring donuts for everybody and put them in the break room. Those donuts all have eggs. Those donuts are all cooked in places that we don't want to eat anything from. So I don't eat those donuts. Why aren't you having any donuts? They'll ask me. I'll say, well, let me see. They got eggs in them for starters. Oh, that's right. You Hare Krishnas don't eat eggs. You know, so I don't have to preach. I don't have to go out of my way to put Krishna consciousness in their face. But by associating with them or worldly minded persons, they see what my lifestyle is, and therefore they gain an understanding. I just had with one of the gentlemen that I've worked with for the longest time, we just had the Christmas season. Of course, everybody's got Christmas cookies. And he told me, he said, so-and-so brought cookies. He said, you've got to try them. They're just amazing. They're the best Christmas cookies you'll ever eat. I said, well, first of all, my mother makes the best Christmas cookies you'll ever eat. Second of all, I can't eat any of those cookies. He said, why? I said, they've all got eggs. He said, you don't eat eggs. That's right. How do you make cookies without eggs? He could not conceive of the idea until I brought him some devotee Christmas cookies. He was like, oh, these are amazing. So they're getting to take prasadam. They're learning about the philosophy, but it's not being in a way that they feel threatened by it. It's being done simply by the example of someone who in their vision is just like them. But we're not. When we are going into this workplace, we're not going there just to, you know, make massive amounts of money to facilitate our sense gratification lifestyle. We're supporting our local temples. We're supporting the deity worship that goes on in our homes. We're supporting sending our children to the schools and gurukulas. We're supporting the cow programs that go on in different projects. So there is a vast difference. Although externally, we're associating with worldly persons, internally, it's a completely different scenario. On one morning walk in Los Angeles, Prabhupada was walking down the street and he was making note of the different houses. And he was saying how these are all very nice bungalows. That was the word he used. I always found that quite entertaining, bungalows. He said, they're all being used for sense gratification, but ours, we are worshiping Krishna. They have a house, we have a house. They have rooms in the house, we have rooms in the house. They are doing activities, we are doing activities. But everything we're doing is for Krishna. So externally, it's the same thing as going on. But internally, it's a completely different scenario. So number 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. In the purport here, Prabhupada, I just want to get down to this here. Excuse me just a moment while Prabhupada says here, Krishna conscious devotees know very well that this material world is designated by the complete arrangement of the Lord to fulfill all the necessities of life for all living entities, without their having to encroach upon the life or the rights of anyone else. This complete arrangement affords the proper quota of wealth for everyone according to their real needs, and thus everyone may live peacefully according to the principle of plain living and high thinking. Unfortunately, materialists who have neither faith in the plan of God nor any aspiration for higher spiritual development misuse their God-given intelligence only to augment their material possessions. Only to augment their material possessions. So this isn't the motivation that we have behind what we're doing. We don't want to be driven by the desire to get mundane achievements, whether they're financial achievements, whether they're name and fame, whether they're awards. We are not driven by the same types of goals that those who are not interested in a devotional lifestyle are. It's plain and simple. Now, this doesn't make us a separatist. This doesn't cause us or encourage us to be judgmental, but it does give us the necessity for an analytical view of what's different about the life we've chosen. And this is the important point that Prabhupada is making here, that trying to achieve mundane things, this is what will actually be not beneficial, that will cause our fall down if we over endeavor for these mundane achievements, become too greedy. Prabhupada says greediness is okay. Lalyam, one must be very greedy for the mercy of Krishna. One must be greedy for the association of devotees. One must be greedy to advance on the path of devotional life. This is all very important, but one cannot go beyond what is allotted to them. There's a very wonderful story I've been reading recently in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And this involves the pastime of Gopinath Pattanayaka. Gopinath Pattanayaka was the son of Bhavananda Roy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, as well as Kavi Karnapur and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who are the chronologers, if you will, of who's who in Krishna Lila and Gaura Lila, have identified Bhavananda Roy as Pandu. Bhavananda Roy had 5 sons, and these 5 sons were identified as the 5 Pandavas. Gopinath Pattanayaka was one of these 5 sons. Now, all of them were members of the Kayastha Brahmin caste. They were engaged in different types of government work, ministers, tax collectors, finance overseers, things of this nature. Ramananda Roy was the middle brother, and he also was a governor on behalf of the government. So in this way, Gopinath Pattanayaka was a tax collector, and it was his responsibility to collect a certain amount in taxes. He was allowed to keep a certain amount as his salary, and then the balance was turned over to the government. It came to be it came to be understood that Gopinath was taking 200,000 kanahas, which is the currency at that time, more than he was supposed to. He was embezzling it, you could say, in modern terms. He had a salary of 400,000, and he was taking 200,000 in addition on the side. And he was misappropriating those funds. This came to be understood by the king, and the king wanted the payment. he was not able to make that payment because the money had already been spent. So he happened to have a collection of very fine horses. So it was decided that the prince would be the one to assess the value of these horses, and then they would be accepted in lieu of the payment until such a time that Gopinath Patanaika could make the factual payment, at which point he would receive the horses back. It was a reasonable arrangement. He'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, as they say in modern terms, and there was an arrangement made. Okay, we'll take this in possession until you can pay us back, and then we'll return that to you. But the value of the horses had to be assessed. This is a suitable, hold, so to speak. The prince did not like Gopinath. And the prince also had one personal idiosyncrasy. He turned his neck like this from time to time and would look upward. In our modern times, we would call that a tic. He had this thing, like that. So when the horses were brought before him to judge, because he was quite expert in understanding horses, he intentionally undervaluated the horses. He gave them a less monetary value than they actually were worth. And this very much upset Gopinath Patanaika. Gopinath Patanaika, we already know from the way this story's gone so far, that he was not somebody necessarily in control of his senses. And so he let his words get the best of him. And he said to the prince, he said, well, my horses may not be as valuable as you say they are, but at least they don't turn their neck and look up at the sky like this. And the prince did not like this at all. He took it as the insult it was intended. And so he decided that Gopinath Patanaika could not give suitable wealth to be held in lieu of his payment, could not make the payment, therefore he was to be killed. And what was the process of death? It's called the chunga. You put on a large raised platform, and in front of that platform is a deep pit. And in the bottom of that pit are many, many swords mounted with the blade sticking up. And then you're pushed off that platform onto the swords. Death by chunga, it was called. This was a common way that criminals were punished. So as he was about to be pushed on the chunga, the devotees went to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they begged Mahaprabhu that you should please go to the king and ask for forgiveness for Gopinath Patanaika. He's your very dear devotee. He's the son of Bhavananda Roy, your eternal servant. And Mahaprabhu looked at them. He said, what are you talking about? I should become like a beggar and go before the king and spread my cloth out and ask for his mercy? I'm a renunciate. I can't be involved in this. Furthermore, if you bring these things up to me again, I'm going to leave. So in this way, they were trying to encourage Mahaprabhu to save Gopinath. He wasn't going to get involved. He said, besides, Gopinath has taken the money of the government, which is the greatest sin, and he has squandered it for his own purposes. Actually, to be very frank, Chaitanya Charitamrita says it, so I'm not making any stories up here. Chaitanya Charitamrita points out that he was spending that money on dancing girls. That's a lot of money on dancing girls, let's just say that. So at any rate, Mahaprabhu was not going to get involved in this. So eventually, through the course of this story, as it's told in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the king came to know of this. He said, I had known, actually, he was told by Kashi Mishra, who was a dear servant of Mahaprabhu. He said, I had no intention of Gopinath being killed. I simply wanted the money he owed the government. And if Mahaprabhu is thinking that he'll leave because of all this involvement, then I'll just completely forget the debt. I don't care about the money. Forget about the money. As a matter of fact, just let the whole thing be forgotten. But please let Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continue to stay here in Jagannath Puri. And don't say anything to Mahaprabhu, because then he'll think that it was because of him that I pardoned him, and then he'll think he was involved, and it'll be implemented, So like this. So the whole thing became very complex. I guess I'll tell the conclusion of the story since we've gone this far into it. The conclusion was that Gopinath Patanaika was brought before the king in humility. And the king was so gracious. He said, not only am I going to forgive your debt of 200,000, but you obviously think your salary of 400,000 isn't enough. So I'm going to double your salary to 800,000. I see Rasa Prada can't believe this. This is what had happened. So in this way, we see that Gopinath Patanaika was greedy for mundane achievements, for material things. And look at the difficulty it caused him. So it's a very practical lesson we can understand. This particular book, Nectar of Instruction, is a very, very essential book that Prabhupada wanted us to study and understand. In the latter part of the book, it becomes very deep, very esoteric. In the beginning of the book, though, it's very basic understandings that we have to appreciate and implement into our devotional life. So we're just closing in on 9 o'clock. I've been asked to kind of finish at that point and save for any answers and questions. Maybe I'll have some answers that anybody may have. I'll turn things back over to our moderators, and thank you once again for this opportunity. And if anyone has questions or comments, we'll try to approach them as we can.
Thank you so much for such a genuinely sweet evenings that you've spent with us. We are so honored. If our format is pretty informal, so if anybody has any questions, takeaways, appreciations, anything they would like to share, please feel free to unmute.
One thing I always, when I get to go to the Woodstock Festival with Indradyumna Swami, I spend about 6 hours a day in the question and answer booth. It's my favorite service. And I always tell the people there, nothing's off limits. Ask anything you want. They ask some pretty serious stuff and some pretty personal stuff. So anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a
Rasa,
question.
go right ahead,
Go ahead.
but you're on mute.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Nice to see you, Prabhu. My humble obeisances.
Jai,
So
glad
glad to
to
see
see you.
Prabhupada.
Rasa and I exchange emails back and forth all the time, so we're old buddies.
Hey, it's kind of weird question, but here we go. So he was the best servant of the best believer of Mahaprabhu, correct? So he was doing the wrong thing. The king forgave him and double his salary, but he is still a pure devotee to Mahaprabhu. So how Mahaprabhu understood, or if he ever knew, that this amount of money was double and he was forgiven for his mistakes or greediness, but how Mahaprabhu ended up on this? Because somehow we're missing that part, what Mahaprabhu said, correct? So can you develop a little bit about it? And I'm sorry for the question.
Not an unpleasant question at all. Very practical question when one hears that pastime. The important aspect of this pastime is that Mahaprabhu required that Gopinath no longer take part in these activities that got him into this. So reformation was required. It wasn't simply, he's done some nonsense thing, now he's got more money, he can do even more nonsense thing. No, he had done some nonsense thing, had been chastised for it, was rewarded by the king according to the king's vision of justice, but because of his intimate relationship with Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu furthered that justice by requiring him to give up these activities. So just like the subject of our discussion today, pitfalls. Each of us has a pitfall. Each of us has some difficulty, some problem, some mistake we've made. It's not simply enough that we just move on. We have to give that up. We have to correct what it is that brought us to the point of making that mistake, of having that pitfall. This is why the association of other close Vaishnavas is important. They can see what it is that we've done that brought us to that point and help us back onto the path of giving that up. So that's the important aspect of understanding the story about Gopinath Pattanayaka correcting his behavior.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Very good question. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just have a follow-up question to that. So then is it if we can't let go of our pitfalls or our actions that have taken us away from Krishna, is that guilt more our ego, or is it something that we have to, like you're saying, through association we have to move past?
Well, first of all, it's Maya. Prabhupada defines Maya as illusion, that which is not. So we've chosen, when we have those pitfalls or make those choices that take us to pitfalls, we've chosen intentionally to give up being Krishna conscious, to give up what we know is correct. And at this point in our devotional service, we know what's right and wrong. It's no surprise to us, you know. Oh, I really shouldn't have bought that lottery ticket. Oh, I really shouldn't have gotten that pack of cigarettes, or, you know, whatever it is. You know, I really shouldn't have eaten those donuts that were in the break room. We all know what's right and wrong. But when we act on those things, it's a conscious decision to go to Maya instead of Krishna. So it can be a weakness. It can be seen as a weakness. Why am I weak? What am I doing in my devotional service that has allowed this weakness to become more prominent? This is where, as you note, association can be helpful. Someone that we're comfortable sitting with, someone that we're comfortable is going to be honest with us and say, Prabhu, I've seen, here's what's going on, and here's what the problem is. Or maybe it's something very intimate and deep inside of us. Someone we can sit and confide that to, that we know is not going to speak it to others, make fun of us, whatever, you know, that we have that confidence that they will work in our best interest. So yes, it's a bit of weak-mindedness because we've chosen Maya, but being able to get good association will help us so that we do not continue to make that same mistake. Is that a good answer? You like it? Yeah, I think it makes sense.
I like that. I especially love your focus on relationships, because I feel like that's so much of what sustains me in my spiritual life. So I love that you just are reminding me of that. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, I've been very fortunate in my spiritual life. I mean, my wife and I have been married for 41 years, and she's always been there to keep me on track. You know, I've got the great association of Sesha Prabhu, who's one of my closest friends in the world and always can just tell me straight up. Indradyumna Swami, you know, you don't travel with Indradyumna Swami and just engage in a bunch of nonsense. It just doesn't happen. He'll bring it right out to you, you know. So I've been very fortunate to have association. Therefore, I know what an essential element it is in our devotional life. That's why I encourage others to find that association as well. Rasa.
So something to add about it. There is no name saying here, but one day I approached one of the devotees, and he didn't have the neck bead, right? So I asked him, "Hey, Prabhu, sorry for being an intruder on your things, but how come you don't wear neck bead?" "Oh, yeah, but the Prabhupada insists on this. You can do whatever you want, but make sure you have your neck bead. This is your protection, Yamadutas, blah, 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 blah." And he it's what it is, Prabhu. It's, you know, we live in these times, these days, and you know, things change, and you know, Maya is incredible. But then I asked, well, you know it's Maya, correct? You know what it is. Why you correct it? Well, because Maya is difficult to conquer. And they said, by the way, I get some irritation once in a while on my neck and stuff like that. So there always be an excuse, all right, to protect ourselves and the mistake that we're making. And that's what you said. We fall because that. And not that we fall, we're not out of Krishna consciousness, it's just we fall in some way that we're not following what we're supposed to, and just because we want to take our willing privilege and do the wrong thing, and instead of correcting and doing the right thing for the benefit of ourselves. But then I say, okay, Maya, yeah, I guess I got some Maya too somewhere somehow. And I left it away because I don't want to be disrespectful, correct? It's not my business. But adding to what you just said, you know, Maya has to do a lot in the yugas that we're living into. It is you know, Kali. You know, Kali is another excuse. Oh, I don't do this because, you know, we're living in Kali, and you know how that goes.
Well, you know, Prabhu, that just re-emphasizes the importance of association. Another thing I've been blessed with, I'm a member of a men's group here in Alachua. There's 10 guys, and we've been meeting together once a week for over 20 years. And we've seen each other go through divorces and death of partners and deaths of children and children in jail and businesses fail. And, you know, we've gone through so many things together as a men's group, and we've always been there for each other. But another thing we're always there for is to correct each other, you know, to point out what needs to be noticed. And never is it a surprise. Oh, gee, I didn't know that. No, we know it. But it sometimes takes somebody we trust to point it out and remind us of it. So the nature of a relationship will determine how frank or forward we can be in our observations with an individual, you know? Yeah.
I'd like to ask, Vaishnav etiquette, it seems like if we don't follow it, that's can lead to a lot of pitfalls. Can you comment on that?
Vaishnav etiquette is really, really essential. Sometimes we have a tendency, or we see that the tendency is there, to appoint ourselves as the Vaishnava police force. Well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Why aren't you doing this? You weren't here, you should be there. The nature of being able to give that guidance is so crucial that A, it's upon a relationship that will tolerate it, and B, that it's done with the deepest humility and sincere concern for the person, as opposed to what we find nowadays of a rampant desire to fault find, a fervent eagerness to criticize others. There was a time Advaita Acharya was in Mathura. He was doing a tour of Vrindavan, and he was staying in Mathura. Now, in Mathura at that time was one Brahmin. This was a very, very learned Brahmin, extremely learned in all 4 schools of the Vedas. However, no one respected him. And the reason was because he was always engaged in criticizing devotees. He was a regular disciple of Ramchandra Puri. So one day, he had the great foolishness, audacity, we could say, to criticize Vaishnavas in the presence of Advaita Acharya. When Advaita Acharya heard him speaking like this, he became like fire. His eyes actually looked as if fire was burning in them. And he roared with a sound that was like Nrsimhadev appearing. He pointed his finger at this Brahmin and he said, because of your offense to the Vaishnavas, I curse you to descend to the lowest planet of hell. Advaita Acharya. We don't usually see this side of Advaita Acharya, but because of the offenses against Vaishnavas, well, fortunately for this Brahmin, he could immediately understand he'd crossed the line. Here was Advaita Acharya, the topmost of Vaishnavas, the head of the Vaishnava Sampradaya at that time. And he had been cursed by him due to his mistake. Advaita Acharya then manifested 4 arms, and it appeared as if he were Nrsimhadev. This Brahmin immediately threw himself at his feet and begged for forgiveness, begged to be please relieved of this curse. Advaita Acharya refrained himself, brought himself back into his normal composure. And he said to the Brahmin, I will give you forgiveness if you perform 3 activities. First, you never criticize a Vaishnava again the rest of your life. Second, you go to the home of every Vaishnava in Mathura and you fall at the feet at their door and beg their forgiveness. And third, you never tell anyone what I've revealed to you here today. So it came to pass that everyone in Mathura suddenly noticed the change in this Brahmin. And many of them found him knocking on their own front door, begging for forgiveness and noticing that he had truly changed himself, reformed himself, given up his bad habits. So this is the mood. You're right, Sakaboma. This is the mood that we have to be fearful of invoking in the Lord if we do not observe Vaishnava etiquette, if we do not properly pay respects to Vaishnavas. All right?
Thank you. I think there's a question in the chat.
The question says, Hare Krishna Prabhu, what would you advise a beginner in Krishna consciousness journey to practice in Vaishnava etiquette? Nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion. Vaishnava etiquette shows long lists of improvements. So what would you advise to start simple and grow gradually? Thank you. That's from Sasmita Mataji.
The first thing we can do is just be on the safe side and always respect all devotees. Always be kind and serving to other devotees. When I was a young brahmachari, we had 20 brahmacharis in the temple. So naturally there were squabbles from time to time. And my temple president here again was expert. He would bring the 2 fighting parties in, have us sit before him. So what's the situation? And we would tell him, and he would say, all right, you fold his laundry and you wash his plates after prasadam. So he would require us to do service for the other one. And by that service, how can you be angry at somebody that's serving you unless you're just a complete nonsense? And none of us were, fortunately. So be on the safe side. As far as reading, read Nectar Devotion and Nectar of Instruction, both. You may not be able to implement the freedom from all 64 offenses listed to the deities, but you can understand what they are and know how to go about it, trying to achieve them. You may not be able to recognize right off who is a Uttama Adhikari, who is a Madhyama Adhikari, and who is a Kanishta Adhikari. Therefore, respect all devotees until such a point you arrive at a level of devotional experience and advancement and can make the distinction. And third of all, unless you have the responsibility of a leader, a guru, or an instructor, don't criticize and point out the faults of others. It's not necessary. If you have a responsibility to do so, the guru must point out the disciples' faults. The temple president must correct what wrongs are going on. Other than that, do we really all have to throw our 2 cents in and fault find everybody's activities? So those simple little things, serve devotees, respect them, and don't criticize them. Read Nectar of Destruction and Nectar of Devotion. Everything will come quite easily. Shall we wrap it up there?
If anyone else has any questions or takeaways, please feel free to unmute before.
I think Rishabh Dev has his hand up.
Yeah, I like what you just said. It made me think about a verse that I recently read, and it in the Bhagavad Gita, it's chapter 17, text 15. It says, austerity of speech consists of speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also regularly reciting Vedic literature. At the beginning of what's a short purport, but Prabhupada says one should not speak in such a way to agitate the minds of others. Of course, when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instruction of his students, but such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students if it will agitate their minds. This is penance as far as talking is concerned, and I really appreciate that, and I'm glad that you brought that up, so thank you.
Rishabh, that was the very first Bhagavad Gita verse I learned as a brahmachari.
Wow, that's wonderful.
A wonderful choice there. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a wonderful wrap up for the class, and it tied in.
Very nice.
Thank you.
We would like to take the time now to thank Chaturatma Prabhu, and please come back and even go more in depth with your journey in Krishna consciousness. It sounds like such an amazing journey, just to see where you are now and how much genuine love and appreciation you have for so many devotees. And so we would love to have you back very soon.
I'd be more than happy to come and join you all again anytime the arrangements can be made. So thank you very much. Happy Satila Ekadasi to all of you. May your Dwadasi tomorrow be even more joyful. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Shri Girid Hari Lal. Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Chaturatma Prabhu ki jai.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, I just, before everybody goes, I put the link to our WhatsApp group, if anybody would like to be notified of any upcoming speakers, and also the link to our YouTube page where you could rewatch tonight's class or watch classes that have been given in the past on Simply Wonderful Fridays. And if you're in the Houston area, please check out the Bhakti Urban Farm. There are many programs going on there that if you're in the area, you wouldn't want to miss. So thank you for taking this time to spend the evening with us, and we hope to see you again soon. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.